Day 18 and no end in sight. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the National Active and Retired Federal Employee Association, also known as NARFE, for this important webinar regarding the current government shutdown. My name is Ken Thomas, NARFE's National President, and I'm joined today by NARFE Staff Vice President of Advocacy, Jessica Klement. As background, NARFE was founded in 1921 with a mission of protecting and enhancing the earned rights and benefits of America's active and retired federal workers. NARFE's membership includes both retired and current federal workers from all branches of the federal government and at all levels, from management, professional, blue-collar, and union backgrounds, and with loyalties to different political parties. NARFE keeps its members informed on important federal benefits information and guidance. We speak with a strong and unified voice on behalf of a broad and diverse membership, which is representative of the entire federal community, to Capitol Hill, the administration, the media, and to the American people. While this unfortunate shutdown is centered on the border security debate, on which there are many opinions, the fact remains that regardless of your views, federal employees are once again pawns in a game of political chicken. Clearly, the solution or answer to every controversial policy debate must not be to shut the government. With more than 800,000 federal employees not knowing when or if their next paycheck is coming, vital services provided to the American people are going unfulfilled. For the next 20 minutes, we'll focus on updating you on where negotiations stand in our nation's capital. Let me assure you that NARFE is working tirelessly on your behalf to end this shutdown and ensure furloughed federal employees receive back pay. We are forcefully carrying this message from federal workers and retirees to members of Congress, the administration, and the media. With your help, that voice will only grow louder and stronger. We continue to serve as a resource for federal employees, retirees, the media, and more, as people look for answers about how the shutdown will affect them and their communities. But this is not about taking sides in the debate over border security. It's about ensuring hard-working federal employees are not collateral damage in a political battle that has nothing to do with them. While this may become the longest shutdown in recent memory, it's not the only one. NARFE has opposed all of them, whatever their length and whatever the issue at hand. Regardless of the merits of either side's argument, who is president, or which party controls which chamber of Congress, government shutdowns have no place in political negotiations. And yet we find ourselves once again on the precipice of the longest government shutdown in history. Making matters worse, the president recently imposed a federal pay freeze for 2019. Despite congressional consensus to provide a 1.9% average pay raise. Even when the shutdown ends, federal employees face the prospect of stagnated pay. The combination of the shutdown and pay freeze will weaken our federal workforce. Both impose real economic costs on federal employees and our country. Both undermine the effectiveness of the work of our government, what our government does, from ensuring national security to safeguarding taxpayer dollars from fraud. By forcing federal employees to work without pay and damaging morale, they impair our government's ability to recruit and retain a highly qualified and talented workforce. The time is past for negative discourse. We are now in a crisis. Federal employees and others who depend on government work are unable to pay bills or provide even the basic necessities for their families. I've heard politicians refer to this shutdown as a non-event, but you and I both know it has real implications for federal employees and this country. Thanks again for joining us for this event. And if you're not a NARFE member already, we urge you to join us and lend your voice to this fight. To join, visit us at narfe.org. Also, a recording of today's webinar and PowerPoint presentation will be available on NARFE's Shutdown Central webpage. Well, I've said enough, so I'm going to turn the webinar over to NARFE's Staff Vice President for Advocacy, Jessica Klement. Jessie?
Thank you, Ken, for that important message. I am so proud to sit here with you today to ensure that everyone in the federal community knows that NARFE is fighting for them and to provide the information they need during this unfortunate and very unnecessary shutdown. Let's get started. Here's what I'm going to cover today. I'll talk about the impact the shutdown is having on both federal employees and the American public, as well as the political and legislative landscape that got us here and where we are now. Then I'll go over the extensive resources on the NARFE website and close with how you can take action. Before we dive into the effects of the shutdown, let's take a quick look at the agencies that are not impacted. This is because all these agencies received fiscal year 2019 funding prior to the start of the fiscal year. Employees at these agencies will get paid on time and services continue as usual. So who and what are impacted by the shutdown? 9 cabinet agencies and their sub-agencies, as well as several independent agencies, have not yet received fiscal year 2019 funding and are currently closed. I'll provide a list on the following slides. These agencies employ more than 800,000 federal workers, over half of whom are working without pay, not knowing when their next paycheck is coming, and the other half furloughed. As employees who are furloughed, for employees who are furloughed, back pay is not guaranteed. But according to Congressman Mark Meadows, quote, "It's actually part of what you do when you sign up for any public service position," end quote. Here at NARFE, we wholeheartedly disagree with this statement. This is not part of what you sign up for when you decided to pursue a career in public service. Statements like these, on top of the shutdown itself, will undoubtedly impact both morale and recruitment and retention of hardworking civil servants. Here's a quick look at some of the agencies impacted by the shutdown. And while essential services are being carried out at these agencies, things like hiring and website updates have been halted. I'll give you a second to take a look at this slide. Here are some of the additional agencies shut down at this time, and more agencies remain unlisted. Let's turn now to the impact of the shutdown on federal employees. For those furloughed, there is no guarantee they will receive back pay. While Congress typically has granted back pay, and NARFE is working to ensure that occurs, the uncertainty breeds financial anxiety. Whether furloughed or working, there are real economic costs to delayed paychecks. Some feds already missed pay over the holidays. The rest will miss their first paycheck at the end of this week. Even if the shutdown ends tomorrow, payments will almost certainly be delayed due to the time required to issue paychecks. Like many Americans, some federal employees live paycheck to paycheck. That means missed payments, resulting in interest charges on credit cards, late fees, and damage credit, which could impact security clearances necessary to keep jobs. It could also mean missed mortgage or rent payments, which could threaten foreclosure or eviction. There is also a direct impact on the important work of those furloughed. With almost 90% of the Internal Revenue Service furloughed, it's unclear whether the IRS will be ready for filing season, especially with the added workload resulting from the recent tax code overhaul. The shutdown will likely lead to delayed tax refunds for millions of Americans. The 2013 government shutdown delayed the start of tax season by 2 weeks and delayed more than $4 billion in tax refunds. IRS furloughs also mean there's no one available when American citizens need assistance. Several students have been unable to get the tax transcripts they need to process their financial aid. Without it, they will be forced to miss a semester. Meanwhile, Many home sale closings are being delayed as the Department of Agriculture will not issue new rural home loans during the shutdown. A growing backlog of FHA loan applications will mean delays for sales by first-time homebuyers. With FEMA closed, home sales in flood zones would not be able to close as flood insurance cannot be obtained. Additionally, if a federal employee is seeking a mortgage and employment verification is required prior to closing, a lender may be unable to verify this during a shutdown. With the shutdown ongoing, food inspections are put on hold, increasing the risk of foodborne illnesses. During the 2013 shutdown, more than 350 food inspections were missed. EPA non-emergency inspections will be delayed. During the 2013 shutdown, the EPA halted its non-emergency inspections at roughly 1,200 hazardous waste facilities, chemical facilities, and drinking water systems. This all leads to increased risk of exposure to hazardous chemicals and unsafe drinking water. The examples are almost endless. While delays in the work of those furloughed may be manageable for a short time, as the shutdown extends, their work will be just as essential to the functioning of government as those not furloughed. They will return from the shutdown with a backlog of work that will not magically disappear, which will have a real negative impact on services. The shutdown also brings a major cost to the larger American economy. While we won't have more accurate figures on the cost of this shutdown until all the dust has settled, we do know that Standard & Poor's estimate of the cost of the 2013 shutdown at $24 billion. That government shutdown lasted 16 days and occurred 5 years ago, during a smaller economy with lower government spending levels. Both factors could make the current shutdown cost more. That said, the current shutdown at 18 days is partial rather than full. But regardless, the economy is losing billions of dollars. Additionally, federal contractors may be forced out of work with no expectation of back pay. A clear example of this is janitorial staff, who can't enter closed federal buildings and have no areas to clean. These individuals are some of the ones hit hardest by the shutdown, with their modest income no longer coming in. The cumulative effect of this lost income for federal employees, contractors, and businesses that rely on their work and business only grows more and more each day. While some feds and others may have changed spending habits due to the shutdown, more and more will continue to change their spending habits each day, having a greater and greater snowball effect on the rest of the entire economy. The $24 billion price tag of the 2013 shutdown could look cheap in comparison to this shutdown if the situation is not resolved soon. So how did we end up here? In the last year, we've experienced 3 government shutdowns, with this one being the longest. President Trump is holding firm on more than $5 billion for a border wall. Democrats are offering $1.3 billion for border security, with no money going to a wall. NARFE takes no position on the merits of this political debate. Unfortunately, the leverage in this disagreement is the 7 remaining FY19 funding bills. At this point, neither side appears willing to budge on its position. When the new 116th Congress was sworn into office last week, one of the House's first acts was passage of 6 of the remaining FY19 appropriations bills and a short-term continuing resolution for the Department of Homeland Security. This legislation also included a 1.9% average pay raise for federal employees in 2019, and as such, had the support of NARFE. The Senate will not take up this legislation, as the President has indicated he will not sign it. A path forward may become clearer in the coming days, but at this point, the shutdown seems likely to continue with no end in sight. Thankfully, there have been efforts to ensure furloughed federal employees receive back pay once the shutdown ends. In the past, the legislation that ultimately reopened the government provided back pay. Legislation has been introduced in both the House and Senate to provide back pay, and we may see action in the Senate this week. However, while it has historically been provided, back pay is not guaranteed. Congress will have to pass legislation authorizing it, and the president must sign it. Another question NARFE is getting often is if the pay freeze is official or if there is hope for a pay raise. The president used his authority to freeze federal pay in 2019 before the end of the year. However, Congress can override this with passage of legislation including a raise, but the president must sign the bill. With both House and Senate passage of a 1.9% average raise, NARFE is hopeful we will be able to get the raise over the finish line and override the pay freeze. Hopefully by now I've answered some of your most pressing questions, but you undoubtedly have more. Never fear, NARFE is here with an abundance of resources to address your specific questions. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you to visit NARFE's Shutdown Central website at narfe.org/shutdown. It is your one-stop shop for all things government shutdown. I want to take a closer look at the 10 things you need to know during a government shutdown. As I've already covered, back pay is not guaranteed. However, you cannot volunteer to work and you cannot use your sick or annual leave. Your health insurance coverage, however, will continue for up to 1 year. Unfortunately, payments to the Thrift Savings Plan will cease during the shutdown. But that's not all. Your years of service will not be affected if you're furloughed. However, that only holds if the shutdown is less than 6 months. Let's hope we don't find ourselves in that situation. You cannot use any government technology, such as your laptop or cell phone, but you may be entitled to unemployment insurance depending on the state in which you live. The rules regarding a second job still apply, whether you're furloughed or not, or whether or not the government is shut down. But perhaps most importantly, you can contact your members of Congress and ask them to end this shutdown. I'm going to cover how to do that at the end of this webinar. Now let's tackle the questions NARFE experts are receiving most frequently. The official term for who works during a shutdown is accepted, but many continue to use the word essential. So how is it determined who's accepted or who's essential or not? Well, that's really up to individual agencies and federal managers, but by law, the federal government is required to maintain functions that provide for national security, provide for benefit payments, or protect life and property. Will I be paid? I know I covered this one already, but I think this is something that just bears worth repeating. By law, accepted or essential employees working during a shutdown must be paid once the lapse in appropriations ends. However, it takes an act of Congress to provide back pay for federal employees furloughed during a shutdown. The back pay is not guaranteed. You may be asking yourself, if I'm furloughed, why can't I take leave? Particularly many of you who are probably off of taking previously scheduled vacation time during the week between Christmas and New Year's. Well, you can't use that leave because this would violate the Anti-Deficiency Act, which is legislation that governs what happens during a lapse in appropriations. Employees cannot substitute paid leave for furlough time because the requirement to furlough supersedes leave and other paid time off rights. If you're one of the many federal retirees listening in on today's webinar, you may be wondering if the Office of Personnel Management is available to answer your questions. Does the shutdown impact any services provided to federal retirees? The answer to that is no. OPM's Retirement Services Division is not funded by appropriations and therefore is operating as business as usual. I touched on this briefly earlier, but you're probably also wondering what happens to your health insurance coverage during a government shutdown. Enrollment in the Federal Employees Health Benefits Program continues for up to 1 year in a non-pay status, and the government will continue to pay its share of the contribution. If you made changes during open season, the effective date of those changes was still the first day of the first full pay period in January for employees. You may still have some lingering questions here. If you are unsure if you are covered, NARFE's federal benefits experts recommend employees who made FEHB changes during open season call their new carriers to ensure coverage. The least you should do is verify whether the doctor, hospital, or medical service you are seeking is going to be covered by the new plan so you can easily be reimbursed once the new plan receives your enrollment change. But what about those other federal benefits? What happens to them during a government shutdown? Coverage under the Federal Employees Group Life Insurance Program continues for a year for those in non-pay status without any cost to the employee. Healthcare expenses under flexible spending accounts will not be reimbursed until the employee returns to a pay status. Eligible dependent care expenses incurred during the non-pay status may be reimbursed to whatever balance is in the employee's dependent care account. Coverage under the Federal Long-Term Care Insurance Program continues as long as premiums are paid. If Long-Term Care Partners, which manages the program, does not receive any premiums for 3 consecutive pay periods, it will begin directly billing the enrollee. Coverage under the Federal Employees Dental and Vision Insurance Program will continue, but employees will get a direct bill for past due premiums if no premium is paid for 2 consecutive pay periods. This essentially means that the government would have to be shut down for a month before hearing from FedVIP plans and shut down for 6 weeks before hearing from federal long-term care insurance partners. Another question I've been getting often is, I retired during the shutdown. Am I actually retired? Well, the answer is yes. If you submitted your retirement application before the government shut down and your retirement date is during this shutdown, then yes, you are in fact retired. But you're also probably wondering if your paperwork's been processed. And unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you there because there is no one answer. If your payroll department is furloughed, processing of your retirement package may be delayed. If this situation applies to you, we strongly encourage you to contact NARFE's federal benefits experts for assistance. I'll provide contact information for them at the end of this webinar. You're probably also wondering how the shutdown affects your thrift savings plan. If you are in a non-pay status for 1 or more full pay periods, you will not be contributing to your TSP account during that time. This is both furloughed and non-furloughed employees. You may make interfund transfers and you may make an in-service withdrawal. More information on the thrift savings plan, particularly about taking out loans during a shutdown, is on both the NARFE and TSP websites. For federal employees working during the shutdown, once the government reopens and pay is made whole, TSP contributions will be made retroactively. The same holds true for furloughed feds, provided back pay is granted. We want you to know that NARFE is working tirelessly to end this shutdown and ensure furloughed feds are paid. But we need your help. Now is not the time to sit idly by. Tell us what is not getting done while you're furloughed. Tell us how the shutdown is impacting your well-being. The only way to get the effects of the shutdown to resonate is to allow NARFE to tell your story. Concrete examples of how this shutdown is affecting you and your ability to do your job is crucial to getting legislators' attention. I hope you will take a few minutes to tell NARFE your story, which you can do on the NARFE Shutdown webpage. In addition to sharing your story with NARFE, we ask that you take a minute to contact your members of Congress. Like me, I'm sure you've seen politicians on TV talking about how this shutdown is not a big deal, or that federal employees signed up for this, or that it doesn't matter because essential work is getting done. You and I both know this isn't true. The only way to change this narrative and correct misperceptions is to tell your story to Congress. Sample call scripts and letters are available on the NARFE website, but I encourage you to make your message personal. And if you are one of the participants on this webinar who's not currently a NARFE member, I hope you will join us to join this fight. You can do so easily on the NARFE website. I now turn the webinar back to NARFE National President, Ken Thomas.
Thank you, Jesse. And thank all of you for joining us today. NARFE continues to be your voice in our nation's capital. I encourage you to visit NARFE Shutdown Central webpage often at www.narfe.org as information changes frequently. Tonight, the President of the United States will address the nation. Any updates as a result of his remarks will be added to NARFE's website. Let's hope our elected representatives can put partisanship aside and get our nation's federal employees back to work. A recording of this webinar and the slides will be on the NARFE website. You may have additional questions related to the shutdown. If you have a question that wasn't covered here today, please contact NARFE at one of the email addresses now on your screen. Thank you again for joining us today. This concludes our webinar.